Jones, Robert Dunford, and Vinod Soman. Juyang and I are going to be presenting the slides today, but the city staff are here to help to answer questions as the need arises. We're happy to be able to host this meeting. We've had several different items over the last 12 months online in order for people to provide some feedback, and you'll see the results of that in this presentation. But we're glad to have this, call it face-to-face as best as we can here today, and look forward to a good dialogue with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in just one moment, and then Juyang is going to go ahead and start the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. As mentioned before, we are going to, this is for the phase 2 of the Transportation Master Plan. And so what you see in front of you right now are the agenda for today and the contents we're going to go over. So then the purpose of this project and the purpose of this particular meeting in itself we'll go through, and then the project timeline of the overall, where we're at. And we'll also go through in detail of the work completed to date in phase 1. And after that, we'll go through some of the needs and opportunities that we've discovered through existing conditions and future business as usual. The business as usual is what happens if we carry on as just as we're doing right now. After this section 4, we'll have a slight pause, get some questions as we come in, and then we'll go into section 5, which is the potential strategies. You might know some of the strategies, you might already looked at it, but we'll go in detail of what the potential strategies that we're considering for this project. And last but not least, we'll go through some of the next steps, what's coming up afterwards. So the purpose of today's meeting is kind of similarly mentioned. We want to summarize what we've done so far, and that includes the project vision and the objective and the performance criteria. These are the kind of the ground rules that we've gone through, foundation that we've gone through in order to get where we are today. And some of the existing conditions and future growth are really the, we wanted to look at those to figure out where we're going in the future. And we want to describe to you some of the potential outcomes that we see as the business as usual approach. And the last 2 items, and we want to show you some of the strategies that we're thinking about for the project, and we definitely want to get your feedback on this. And as for the timeline for the project, as mentioned, we are in the phase 2 of the project, as you can see at the bottom of the start. And so the whole project is in 5 phases. And the 5 phase, by the end of 5 phase, that's the completion of the project we're hoping to get to by March 2022. But really the critical timeline is that by November of this year, we want to be able to provide a report to the council, so that really providing them the draft recommendations of the project. And next we have work completed to date, and Brett will go over some of the items starting now.
Thank you very much, Juyang. And if you can just monitor if other people are coming to let them in. I saw it pop up once, but that's, I appreciate that. I had started, this was my introductory remarks, mentioning that we have been having some online consultation over the last 12 months. And maybe some of you who are listening here today were part of that, and we greatly appreciate that. We spent a good amount of time in our minds, a lot of time, to try to make sure that we can work closely with the community to develop the vision statement for the Transportation Master Plan. So what you're seeing on the screen is the approved vision statement that was approved by Council in April of this year. And it reads, as the city grows, Peterborough's transportation network will be enhanced to create a low emissions responsive system where people of all ages and abilities can move safely, sustainably, and efficiently, no matter how they choose to travel today and in the future. As part of that presentation to Council in April, we also presented and had approved by Council objectives for the Transportation Master Plan. So we have our vision, and then that vision has 5 objectives underneath it that we're going to help us achieve that vision. And so you'll see those on the screen. I'll just highlight the titles, and we worked with the community and different stakeholders at the city and counselors to finalize these in the categories of travel choices, community building, safe and livable communities, climate mitigation and the natural environment, and economic and financial. So these are the objectives. And then on top of those, or actually perhaps it's better to say below those, are performance criteria. So a total of 34 performance criteria were developed for this project to help us determine if we're meeting these objectives and if we are then in fact meeting the vision. We want to have some ways to measure through different tools to determine how well different strategies and different projects are working toward that vision. And those 34 criteria we've been grouped into 3 different categories. Some of them address strategies, which would be like a citywide approach. Some of them are individual projects, could be a specific piece of infrastructure, and some of them would be more something that would be monitored in the future. For instance, if to the number of collisions. We don't necessarily know the number of collisions in the future, but someone can monitor that, and hopefully that number will continuously go down. Or like the number of accessible intersections, like the city has a plan to make intersections accessible on a regular basis with a budget, but that's something that would be monitored and not necessarily delineated in the transportation master plan looking citywide. We're looking at citywide solutions. And so today, in this presentation, we're really looking at the criteria that are focused on the strategies. We're at a high level, and today we won't be discussing individual projects for any mode of transportation. We'll be looking at it like on a citywide basis on the strategy to take. Now, we had those 34 criteria, but Council has identified 4 that they want to make sure we focus on. So we wanted to acknowledge that. And those revolve around travel mode shift, safe transportation systems, reduced capital and maintenance costs, and meeting climate change mitigation goals. So those are the 4 that we are focusing on through our work. We're conducting this project through the environmental assessment process for master plans. This is a standard process used in Ontario. There are 5 specific project phases, and right now we are concluding phase 2 and actually starting that phase 3, and that's why we're looking for your input on this. As Ju Young had mentioned, we intend to go to council, your council, in November and look to complete this project by the end of the first quarter, the end of March 2022. I wanted to go in now to the needs and opportunities. As part of the environmental assessment process, there's a couple of key items that have to be addressed. We need to make sure that the public understands why we are doing the transportation master plan. And so we've developed that vision statement, and now we're going to put some more details to that to understand, like, why do we have to have a vision for transportation? What does the future hold? And what kind of challenges or opportunities do we see there? The second item as part of the environmental assessment process is to look at different alternatives. It's not just going to be one alternative that is just pushed through. You're going to see today, actually, we're looking at multiple different strategies. So we want to make sure that we're considering a lot of different opinions and a lot of different ideas to come out with, well, what would be the most appropriate strategy, and then eventually like list of projects for the city of Peterborough. And the third part of the environmental assessment process is what we're doing right now, and that's consultation. And we have been doing quite a bit online through the pandemic regarding the vision statement, the objectives and the criteria, performance criteria. And we're glad to have this meeting here today to also talk about these next phases and to talk about what are those needs and opportunities and what are some strategies to address them. So I'm going to get into that now. So, and I skipped forward one slide too soon. apologies there. This first slide is trying to indicate that Peterborough is expected to grow in population and jobs between the now and the year 2051. Some of this growth is expected to take place in the downtown. If you look on the screen, the left side of the screen is, we'll call it existing conditions today from the year 2018. And then the right side of the screen is the forecast growth to the year 2051. And so the darker the shade of red, then the greater the density by acre. So this way is kind of an apples to apples comparison. If we are doing this per acre comparison, we can see, depending, doesn't matter what it takes into account the fact that some of these zones are different sizes. So we can see that there has been some expected to be growth in the downtown and other existing developed areas, and there also is growth forecast in some areas further from the center of town. And just like I said, between the two sides of the screen, you can see that some areas are lighter and are going to darker color. That's the density overall. When we look specifically at population, between now and the year 2051, the forecast is for the population to increase by about 50% over the existing levels to about 125,000 people by the year 2051. So this is over 30 years. It's not going to happen overnight. And you can see once again that it is spread around the city, some in the downtown, some in existing areas, some on the fringe as well. We also wanted to look at the employment growth. So we see the employment growing by about 30% between now and the year 2051. Similar to the population, the employment growth is expected to be distributed throughout the city. And there's some benefit to this. If jobs and population are relatively close together, it gives people an easier commute and maybe more options on the ways that they commute. That's talking about the forecast growth. We then have been using different tools to try to determine, well, what would that do in terms of people's traveling? And typically in a transportation master plan, we're looking at the morning peak hour and the evening peak hour. So this slide here is showing the morning peak hour. And once again, we're going to be comparing what we call today, in this case, the year 2018 is when our data are from, and then our future horizon year, which is the year 2051. So we're on the left side of the screen, we're showing the areas that today are looking at our tool are congested. And then on the right side of the screen, well, if nothing were done and we had that population and employment growth like I just was showing, where would we expect congestion in the future? Now, of course, we want to do something, but it's really important for us to establish a baseline. We want to know like where we are today, where we might be in the future if nothing were done, because then we can compare that to these strategies that we'll show in a little bit that are trying to address these concerns, so that the map on the right, which is showing a good bit of congestion in different parts of the city, okay, that would be the baseline if nothing were done. But what if we did do something? How could we impact that map and make it showing less areas of congestion? So this is showing the morning. This would be, let's say, like the commute hour in the morning. And then this slide is showing the commute hour in the evening. It's typically between 4 and 6 p.m. And typically also throughout Ontario and Canada, the afternoon, the PM peak hour is the busiest hour. If you think about, some stores might not be open from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. when people are commuting or going to school or whatnot during that time, but many of them are open, say between 4 and 6. And so we often see that the PM peak hour is the busiest travel hour of the day. And so this slide is showing, and if we compare that to the morning, like here in the morning, there's a few areas, but in the afternoon, there's more areas that are experiencing congestion in existing conditions. And so if nothing were done and the population increased by 50%, it's not surprising that you would see more areas of congestion in the future. And some of the ones that are existing today likely would get worse. This is if no improvements were made. So we're trying to set that benchmark or a baseline, maybe not a benchmark, but a baseline of where it would be if nothing were done. So then we looked at some of those performance criteria that I summarized at the very beginning to say, okay, what would happen if nothing were done, and to some of those criteria. And so on this slide, we're just looking at the way people travel in that key peak hour in the afternoon. And it's not surprising that if nothing were done, then the way people travel in the future would be similar to what it is today. And so this is really showing us that something should be done, right? Measures to encourage a shift in travel behavior will be needed if we want to reduce the amount of congestion or the need for road widening. Some measures are going to be needed. We've looked at vehicle travel and greenhouse gas emissions. And so if we follow the business as usual approach, the vehicle kilometers traveled are going to be increasing. And also the greenhouse gas emissions would be increasing. And so we know that that's, the council has made mitigating greenhouse gases of priority. And so if nothing is done, it's not surprising that those emissions likely would increase. So we're going to be coming up with some strategies with your help as to how do we mitigate that in the future. Then again, if nothing were done, not surprising that people would be spending more time on the road. The congestion is increasing. And if you look on the screen on the right, the right side of the screen on these bar charts, you can see that the percentage increase is quite substantial. If, let's say, before the pandemic, you thought there was a lot of traffic for your evening peak hour, well, in the future, there might be 3 times that amount. So these things are showing us, well, with 50% growth in population. Now, this is not happening overnight. This is over 30 years. But if nothing were done, if no investments were made, then we would see some increases in the time on the road and the time that you're on the road that you're in traffic congestion. Looking at transit ridership would be expected to increase modestly per capita. But remember now, we're adding 50% of the population. So even a modest increase or just adding those people, we would still need to do some investment in transit because there would just be more people riding the bus just as the population increases. And then we wanted to look at the time in congestion. So be it by bus or by car, because we have to remember that the bus is driving in the same lanes that the car is driving, trips taken in congestion would be expected to increase by a considerable percent, especially in the PM peak hour. And so if the car is stuck in traffic, then the bus can also be stuck in traffic, and that can be a challenge for the bus to maintain their on-time reliability. As someone who takes transit, I'm coming to you today from Markham. It's always a frustration when you see your second bus pulling away because your first bus got you there like a minute or 2 late, and you weren't able to get onto the next one, and you have to wait for another one to come. So certainly, reliability in the transit network and just the amount of trips taken in congestion would increase if we did nothing, and the population employment increased as is forecast. I just wanted to remind people of the 34 priorities we identified, that we're using these to look at the council's top 4, and this is just giving a little bit of an example of what would happen here in terms of like, okay, so the council is interested in travel mode shift. So if we did nothing, there would be a minimal change in behavior from today. So we really wouldn't be meeting that council priority. Safe transportation systems. Well, increased travel and congestion could negatively impact safety potentially, so we wouldn't really be meeting that. Reduce capital and maintenance costs. Well, we wouldn't be spending money because we're not building anything. We're not investing, but at the same time, the increased auto travel and congestion could lead to additional wear and tear and make maintenance more costly. And then meeting the climate change and mitigation targets.
There's a mic and a camera, but I don't see a camera. If you want to talk.
If we were trying to mitigate the climate change and mitigation targets, there are increased auto travel and congestion. That's only going to increase the emissions. So what this is all kind of showing is that we will need to come up with some measures to encourage a shift in travel behavior if we want to achieve this vision that we've already set and that Council has endorsed for transportation in the year 2051. Those are about half of the slides that we wanted to present today. And the next step, we want to go in to look at the potential strategies to encourage a shift. We don't want to just sit on our hands and just close our eyes and think nothing's going to change and we don't need to do anything. We want to be proactive. That's what the whole transportation master planning process is about, is to identify what we think is going to happen in the future with population employment, and then also to make the transportation network work together with that. But before we get into those, I did want to stop for a moment to see if someone had a question on the slides presented to this point in the presentation. You can put that in the chat, as Ju Young said. I'll be quiet in just one moment and you could unmute yourself if you'd like. This will not be your only time to ask questions during this presentation. We'll stop also at the end, and then we can talk about the forthcoming slides in the second part of the presentation, or any of the slides that I've already spoken to. Do we have any in the chat right now, Ju Young?
Yeah, so I've gotten a question from Jeremy and asking whether if there's, I think a lot of the questions are actually coming directly to me. So, but I've got the one here where we can see the 34 performance criteria. I believe that is on the project website on the phase 1 report. We've uploaded a phase 1 report. It should be on the right panel of the project. And it's under documents. Nathan, if you can see on your bottom left corner, there is a start video or stop video. And then we've got a question also and asking, do the current climate mitigation goals include any actual targets, for example, net zero?
So in our coming slides, we will be showing for our different strategies the modal split that we think we can get for different modes of transportation. None of them are showing, we haven't done any analysis to try to say that this strategy would be a net zero, but you'll see in the second half of the presentation when we get into the strategies how the percent that are driving alone will decrease as we go through the strategies, and then different modes such as walking or cycling or transit will increase as we go through the strategies. A net zero, we have not tried to calculate something like that, but we are trying to shift travel behavior to more sustainable modes.
Thank you, Brett. So I've got a couple questions coming from James. James, I think these are great questions. Just wondering if I just want to give you an opportunity if you want to speak up and ask the questions directly. If not, I can definitely read them out for everybody.
No, I'm fine to read them out. It's okay. So my first question was, are you going to be considering pedestrianizing parts of the downtown? You know, such for example, like in Hunter Street, where we've seen the cafe district and the limited cars, and there is kind of quite a popular area, but the potential of the area is still limited by the fact that it's still a traffic throughway. I come from Europe, and you know, we're quite used to having downtowns being fully pedestrianized and rather than car centric. So that's one thing that could really see a bit of a modal shift, take cars away from being the center of attention in the downtown area. And the other question I have is about Reed and Rubidge, and basically they're 3-lane highways running through the city. That's how I see it. They're very good examples of a car-centric design, And I've seen that before in some places in Europe as well, where I used to live in Brussels and they had basically like motorways running through the city. And it makes it very uncomfortable for pedestrians, it encourages high speed, it encourages driving, and it doesn't really make for a pleasant atmosphere. So when you think about modal shifts, these are sort of things that you're going to be tackling.
I'll start with an answer, and then if anyone from the city wants to chime in as well. So this is we're looking at a citywide for the transportation master plan, and we're certainly trying to encourage pedestrian activity in terms of like changing a street's function to be pedestrians only. We would not get into that level of detail here, but certainly that is something that could be done in the future. We would look at it as maybe that could perhaps be a recommendation, or there's different ways to do like a pilot project. Like different cities will close down a street, like in the summer, let's say, on a weekend or something, to encourage pedestrian activity. And sometimes if those are very successful, then it can lead to being more often than that and maybe permanent, who knows. But for the transportation master plan, we'd be looking at strategies to encourage walking, but not necessarily identifying like a certain street to close. We could possibly do that, but we'd be looking probably at a higher level. And through our analysis, like we're still at a high level here in terms of like what would the strategy be. So we haven't been looking at specific streets yet to determine if they need additional walking or cycling facilities. Now the city is already also undergoing a cycling master plan as we speak. And so they are looking for places to improve infrastructure and add policies or programs. But we're not at the point yet in this transportation master plan where we're looking at specific streets to maybe do a road diet, or we're not looking to reduce lanes or increase lanes at this point on specific streets. But certainly that is part of our scope, is to consider to do those types of things as we try to encourage people to shift their travel mode to more sustainable modes.
I think I was more suggesting examples rather than saying these are specific projects, but the idea of having like a strategy where you focus on downtown becoming a car light area and pedestrianisation being part of that would certainly be part of a wider strategy, and I don't think it's part of a specific project. And example of those streets were just two examples I've seen. So they're just examples to demonstrate what I was thinking. Like in the strategy, would you be suggesting moving away from having things like these kind of highway style roads in cities and saying that roads should be always two ways, they should always have, say, wide pavement, that would be part of a strategy. And I feel like at a high level, you should be considering these.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, and I'm writing that down. And this is recorded, so we won't miss your comment. And so I think we'll be talking more about that in the second part of the presentation, actually, when we're looking at those strategies. So please stay tuned. Because those are the types of comments that we're looking for, right? How do we come up with a strategy that will help us to achieve that vision? Do you have others right now, Ju Young?
Joel, I had a question, but I think Kevin had answered that in the chat. So thank you so much for that, Kevin. I think we can move on to chapter, the next section.
Yeah, so thank you for everyone who's asked the questions so far. You're welcome to ask questions on the slides we've already covered at the end of the presentation as well. But even some of these questions are kind of leading us right into the second half of the presentation. So I'll continue. And so we recognize that the vision for the TMP is not a business as usual approach. We're trying to establish that baseline, but we're not content, like I said, to sit on our hands. And so now we want to consider strategies to better accommodate travel in the future. And so to do that, we have come up with different themes or elements that could encourage a shift in travel behavior. And we've done this for walking and cycling, for transit, to make roads work better. And also we recognize that policies are important to help us achieve our objectives. And so we've put those into the mix as well. This is a summary of the different ones that we've been considering. And I'm going to go into each column individually now. So for potential active transportation elements of a strategy, we have a couple related to walking and a few related to cycling. I had mentioned that the city is currently undertaking its cycling master plan. Maybe some of you have been involved with that development. And so we have tried to incorporate the three main elements of that cycling master plan in terms of they had three different scenarios. And so we are showing each of those scenarios as possible elements here. These are shortened to fit onto the screen, but recognizing that these scenarios contain, like for instance, the continue scenario, like we're focusing on these in terms of the number of kilometers of new facilities, but these would be supplemented by programs to encourage people to bike more and different policies as well. So it's not solely the infrastructure, but also it's a whole suite, it's a whole strategy in itself just for cycling that would include things other than infrastructure programs and policies. And then for walking, like a moderate investment in expanding the sidewalk network or an aggressive investment. And maybe to the point about having like streets be car free, that could be part of like an aggressive investment, or maybe we need to consider it as even like an additional element. For the transit, we have a number of different items. Implementation of a new transit network. Just like the city is undertaking a cycling master plan, there also is a transit plan being developed as we speak. And so there are people looking at this future population and employment growth and trying to determine the best routing for the transit network to suit where that population employment is expected to grow. So that's one of the elements. Another one would be to increase the service hours. On the screen, it says by doubling the frequency, but it could be by any amount. Like the more you increase, like you would hope to get more riders. It could be less than double, it could be more than double, but increasing the service hours. Also, now this could be a challenge, but increasing the transit speed. So typically, like when I'm on the bus, I think York Region Transit, their travel speed is only like 28 kilometers an hour. And so probably if you're driving by yourself, you can average higher than that because you're not stopping at different stops. So are there ways to increase the transit speed to make it more commensurate, similar to the speed that a private vehicle is going through queue jump lanes or other different measures to try to help the transit to increase its speed? There's an opportunity, or at least an idea, maybe not an opportunity, but an idea to reduce the cost of taking transit. Like it always will cost, it always has to be paid for somehow. I don't like to use we say free, but by free, what we mean is if you boarded the bus, you would not be charged a fare. That's what we mean by free. Of course, someone is paying for the bus somewhere, so there would be some way to pay for that, but no one would be asked to pay when they got on the bus, and if we use that element. To address climate change items, we could move to emission-free fleets. And also kind of just going with that whole transit speed, there's an opportunity for exclusive transit lanes. I mentioned I live here in Markham, and in the time I've lived here, they've built a bus rapid transit lanes that only the bus travels in to try to increase the speed. Looking at the road networks, there's a number of different elements. They could be related to safety improvements. It could be widening of existing roads or building new arterial collector roads. It could be intersection improvements, signal optimization. Sometimes if you'll see, oh, they have a green signal, but there's no one coming from that direction. Why can't I get a green when I'm stuck here at a red? So there could be some improvements to the signals to address those types of situations. Future technology in terms of connected or automated vehicles. The city is actually trying to pilot something related to that. So how does that play a role in the future? And then also some road related improvements that are to help transit, those queue jump lanes or transit signal priority Sometimes the transit vehicle would get a green signal first and to get the transit vehicle out ahead, or like I was just describing, like in Markham with dedicated lanes. The last column that was on that summary slide was on policy elements. So there we could change how parking is regulated to limit the supply. It used to be that there would be a parking minimum. So some jurisdictions are going to a parking maximum. They do not want you to provide too much to encourage parking and even discourage other uses. Maybe you've had to walk across a large parking lot before, and it might not be that pleasant. There could be increased parking rates, different places. I was just in Boston, of all places, recently, and paid $50 to park a car to attend an event. And I thought, wow, my goodness. Maybe if I went to that event again, I might try to take transit rather than pay $50. Or also just expand the areas of paid parking. There's only limited areas in the city that you have to pay today. So those areas could be expanded, or areas that you don't pay today could paid parking could be implemented. Those are some policies. Congestion charge. Now this typically is only done in some of the bigger cities, like we can think of London, the United Kingdom, where people are charged to travel in a certain area or during certain periods of time by automobile. But remember, we're looking 30 years in the future. And so, and if we really want to be aggressive and we really want to meet some of these goals, we might need to do some really aggressive items. And so we put that one on the table. And then adjusted land use approach. You'll remember the slides earlier where we showed like the two different colors of red or purple or like a gray to show like where the density is of population and employment. And so if we could perhaps re-examine that through land use to try to limit the growth in greenfield areas and redirect it to intensification areas. So these are different elements that we're considering in terms of how do we develop a holistic strategy to meet the vision and objectives. We've done some preliminary assessment to try to ask ourselves and to answer a question, can individual elements result in a shift in travel behavior? And what we were looking at at first was just transit. And so we said, okay, if we do nothing, we expect in the PM peak hour about 6.5% to 7% of trips would be on transit in the year 2051. Well, if we doubled the frequency, would that double that number to say 12 or 13%? And from our analysis, we think that no, it wouldn't. It would increase it, but not like doubling the transit didn't result in a doubling of ridership. It only increased it by 0.5% up to 7.1. Well, what if we increase the speed to be the same as the automobile? Making a difference for sure, but not like doubling the number of people taking transit. We were hoping that it would result in a bigger percentage of people taking transit. What if we made it so that if you got on the bus, you didn't have to pay anything to take the bus? Would that make people change to use transit? And so once again, we saw, yeah, it is increasing more people to use it, but in terms of like doubling the number of people, we don't think necessarily that would work. And even when we combined a couple of measures, it's not necessarily the end all be all. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, but the point is that maybe just putting all of our eggs in one particular basket is likely not the best solution. Like I was saying, we want like a holistic solution that's looking at multiple facets to try to help achieve this transportation vision. Through the cycling master plan, through work that our team is doing in the transportation master plan, we've been considering cycling in other communities. In the cycling master plan, they looked in Canada and outside in other parts of North America and in Europe to see places that have a cycling mode split either today that Peterborough would like to achieve or have plans for the future. And so a number of these cities, both within Ontario and outside, have a number of things in common. like Peterborough, Guelph, Kingston, St. Catharines, they all have universities in them. Fort Collins has Colorado State University. Madison is the home to the University of Wisconsin. So there are some similarities there, just looking at those types of cities. And then when you look at those existing mode splits and you see the two from Scandinavia, we did want to indicate that they have extensive dedicated networks, like 600 kilometers in Finland, 400 kilometers in Sweden, and maybe a number of other items that we need to be considering. I actually lived in Norway as a child in my youth. And like the gas, even though they had the North Sea oil, like the gas there was the highest I've ever seen anywhere in the world where I've been. And to buy a car, they had like 100% tax on the car. It's a high quality of life there, no doubt. But there are a number of factors, I think, and that was Norway, not Finland or Sweden. But we've been looking at these different places to kind of come up with, okay, how do we need to get to where they are, or how are we going to put together this cycling vision, and how can we achieve it? And so some things from the research that we've seen is that communities with high cycling rates tend to have one or more of the following: a favorable climate, extensive bike networks, a higher population density, and a strong bicycle culture and support programs. Now, they might not have all of those, but they have at least one and sometimes multiple of those types of elements. So if today, if we do nothing, by the year 2051, we're not going to have a high percentage of people cycling, we don't believe, but the Cycling Master Plan has come up with 3 different alternatives. And how do we really push this to try to go and embrace what some other places are doing to move that to a much higher level, either 5 to 7%, 7 to 10%, the Accelerate scenario, or even the Spark to 10 to 20%. So that just kind of gives you like a sense that like transportation is fairly complicated, I would say, and why people travel the way they do. And we need to be thinking about like multiple aspects to bring together to try to affect travel change, travel behavior change, because travel behavior is habitual and you have to do something considerable to change the way people are doing things. And so that's what we want to get into next. What are some hybrid strategies? And we wanted to just start off by saying, if you remember the slide with the 4 different columns of different elements, well, there are up to 450 permutations that we could come up with by matching different elements. So 450 would be quite a few to try to study. So we're looking for a combination of measures to encourage a shift in travel behavior. But to study 450, we wanted to narrow it down to a more manageable number so we can do a good amount of analysis. And so our approach to developing the strategies that I'm about to show is we chose 5. And the hybrid strategies have been developed by our team, WSP, working with the city, and include various combinations of the elements with a different emphasis for each strategy. And you'll see that as I go through them in a moment, because each strategy is developed to identify or to achieve a different modal split, a modal split for each mode of travel. And then based on the testing of the various elements to date and experiences from other jurisdictions, we've put together these strategies. Now, we're here today to get input from you to see, like, do you think, does one of these strategies resonate with you more than the others? Do you think that we should take a different element and add it to a strategy? Because the recommended strategy is going to be used to guide the next steps of the Transportation Master Plan. And after we can determine that strategy, then we get into the specific capital projects, specific policies, investments, and priorities for implementation. So I'm going to go ahead and start in with these strategies. There's 5 of them, like I said, and we have them, each strategy, we've divided on 2 slides just so it's a little bit easier to digest. And so I wanted to draw your attention to the top right hand of the screen. There we say mode target. And so you can see the different icons. This is what we think could be achieved, or we hoped could be achieved. We're still testing these, so I don't know if we can say think we can achieve, but we hoped would be achieved for different modes using this strategy. so that the feet represent the walking, and then you have the cyclist for cycling. The blue icon is a bus for riding transit, and the last one is a car for people driving. So in this hybrid strategy 1, we called it status quo. It's a little bit more than status quo. I mean, we are doing something here. It's not like that baseline where we've not added any investment. We are putting some investment in. Like you can see, there would be a moderate investment in a sidewalk network expansion, primarily in the downtown and neighborhood areas, and to also look to fill in missing segments along transit routes. If there's parts of sidewalk that aren't there for one reason or another, and they're on a transit route, we'd want to try to fill those in, because that would have a beneficial impact perhaps on transit as well. And this strategy includes just the continue scenario out of the cycling master plan. So there are some investment in cycling, but not as much as some of the other scenarios that were studied in that document. Regarding the transit, there would be some increase in service hours, 14%. You'll see that number is going to be going up as we go through the other strategies. And there would be some roadway improvements, intersection and safety improvements. There could be widening of existing roads or building new roads. And there would certainly be some measures to try to optimize their performance. So that is like the first strategy that we are considering. Now we're trying to, this one is just termed nudge. We could choose a different name, but nudge is what we've chosen here. And you'll see that the numbers are starting to change a little bit. I'm just going to go back one. So here you see 77% for cars. And on this one, we've dropped it to somewhat 72 to 75. And so you'll see that now we're increasing some of the more sustainable modes. We still have a moderate investment in the sidewalk network in this strategy, but we're now using the accelerate scenario from the cycling master plan in this strategy. And that includes 80 kilometers, as opposed to our previous strategy only had 20 kilometers. So 80 kilometers of new cycling infrastructure. And a number of elements that aren't just that infrastructure, but cycling facilities. I actually get to bike to work, but pre-pandemic, if I'm not taking transit, then I'm biking. And like the building that we work in, that Ji-Young and I work in, has a locker room with a shower facility. And so if there was no locker room and shower, I would not bike to work. It's too far. I get too sweaty. So that's like those types of cycling facilities. If it's parking, just bike parking, it could be facilities like end of trip facilities like locker room and shower. And then there could be strategic upgrades that aren't just in the downtown area, and funding to increase levels for programming and support. We have to convince people that cycling is a good way to travel. To me, I love it, but not everyone feels that way, and why? And so are there programs to try to help people feel more comfortable with cycling? And that could be part of this overall hybrid strategy number 2. In terms of transit, we did keep the hours at 14, but there's different elements here. Does include for roadway intersection and safety improvements, could be widening of existing roads or building new roads. You do see some other items here, consideration of major corridors improvements only to improve traffic flow and try to defer or delay the need for widening. Some infrastructure to benefit transit services. Like I said, as we go through, the strategies become a little bit more aggressive as we go. And we're just trying to, we understand the council's priorities, but we want to show a range of alternatives as part of the environmental assessment process, and to try to understand that not everyone feels exactly the same way about travel. The next one we've called shift. So moderate investment in the sidewalk network, that accelerates scenario from the cycling master plan. And then here we wanted to input some items for parking regulations to increase the cost of parking in the downtown and to encourage a higher transit use. That is a measure. Like people, at least for me, I make a lot of decisions based on what things cost, right? And if it's a cost that's coming out of your pocket, it's one that you really can feel, then not that we're increasing the price of cost the cost of parking to $50 like I paid not too long ago, but to increase it to another amount to try to say, okay, where is a spot where people might start to shift their behavior? In this alternative, we've gone to a 43% increase in service hours, so almost half, like adding 50% on top of what you already have today. And then that you'd be using that new transit network, just the routing system, which is under development as we speak, and trying to improve the frequency of service during peak hours to 15 minutes on key corridors. And I know 15 minutes, I remember just the bus that I take when it went from 28 minutes to 21 minutes. It might not sound like a lot, but it made a world of difference in terms of just the overall travel time and your ability to connect to another bus. Roadway improvements, strategic road network improvements to address capacity deficiencies, and with a prioritization on safety improvements and enhanced transit travel time. There could be a limited expansion of the road network, primarily to address safety issues, but there could be some road construction or road widening. Intersection improvements certainly would be something considered because we're trying to reduce the delays and emissions, right? So some of these improvements are to the road network, but they have a benefit to transit, to emissions as well. And so we would be considering the widening or new roads once optimization measures to support transit have been implemented, or in areas where a regular fixed route cannot serve. The transit doesn't go to every single spot in the city. I've got two more I wanted to describe, and then we'll be done shortly with the presentation. We'll get back to questions and answers. So in this hybrid strategy number 4, transform, we're showing an aggressive investment in the sidewalk network in the downtown, but in new growth areas and major intensification corridors, and to fill in those missing links. This strategy has the Spark scenario from the cycling master plan. So we went from 20 kilometers of facility to 80 kilometers to now in strategy 4, 160 kilometers of new cycling infrastructure by the year to 8 kilometers a year to the year 2041. So 160 more kilometers. And then it's not just the infrastructure, but it's increasing in programming costs and encourage a shift to cycling, and also an expansion of the off-road trail system. I know for myself, if I can go to work on a trail, wow, what a life that is. That's even better than having to be like in the boulevard or on street. So if we can expand the trail system, not only for recreation, but also utilitarian purposes, that's can be a big benefit. And you'll see in the top upper right-hand corner, once again, how the modal split is continuing to go more toward the sustainable travel and to reduce the car travel. So from strategy 3 is 68 to 71, strategy 4 for cars, 61 to 73. This also includes policy development. So once again, we have those parking regulations. It could be increasing the cost and in order to try to encourage people to use other modes. Intensification land use approach. So maybe to limit the future growth in greenfield areas and redirect it into built up areas along arterial and collector roads, where intensification and higher densities would help to support people using transit. You would have more people that would be able to use the transit or walking or cycling. So there's some policies for sure in this hybrid strategy. And in this transform strategy, a 71% increase in the service hours. So we've gone from 14% to 43 to 71. You see that increase. And so a number of these elements to try to, and then here we've put in to subsidize or make free the transit. So if you were to board the bus, you wouldn't be paying anything out of your pocket, or it would be reduced from what the cost is today, as a way to try to encourage people. There also is something to do with equity in that. I mean, we're using multiple different tools to consider these different strategies, and equity is part of that equation. So there are certainly some benefits to making transit a lower cost or free from an equity standpoint. Roadway improvements you'll see on the screen. Road improvements to include separated cycling facilities on all major collector and arterial roads, The one gentleman was talking about a road diet, or at least that's what I would kind of summarize what he had mentioned. So here we see that in this strategy. And a road diet would be like if you had 4 lanes today, maybe you would have 3 in the future, and you would repurpose that extra space for another mode of travel. So if your 4 lanes was 2 lanes in each direction, in the future, you'd have 1 lane in each direction, and the 3rd lane would be in the center, and that could be used for left turns, let's say. Strategic road network improvements for safety and enhanced travel time, and then trying to use that new technology to help reduce delays and emissions, all part of this hybrid strategy number 4. The last one we wanted to show today, we called it the climate focus. This is the most aggressive of all the strategies that we're showing. And you'll see here, just looking at the car in the top upper right-hand corner, 61 to 63. This one, we have it at 50% or less. So this is a long-term vision for 30 years from now. And it requires like a lot of aggressive measures, aggressive investment in the sidewalk network, the most aggressive scenario out of the cycling master plan, use of all the different policies that we've mentioned in terms of parking to increase costs and expand where you have to pay for parking, to reconsider the land use approach. This would be to limit approved and future growth in greenfield areas and to redirect that into built up areas along the arterial and collector road networks. And then congestion charging. We said that not too many places do this, but we didn't want to put it off the table if we're looking 30 years from now. If we really want to try to shift the way people are traveling, this is something that we think should be considered or could be considered, to collect a fee for driving during peak hours of the day or in major corridors. This is the most aggressive for transit. We've gone from 14 to 43 to 71. In this scenario, 120. So we're more than doubling the service hours that would be that buses would be in use. So the frequency would be 10 to 15 minutes on all routes all day, and more frequent service on key routes during the key the greatest demand hours. The transit fare would be less than today and possibly free. At least you wouldn't pay to get onto the transit. There could be exclusive transit lanes on key corridors. And then the buses would be converted to a zero emission. Once again, this is the climate focus strategy. So we wanted to put that one in to this one. The roadway improvements, the only road improvements would be a rehabilitation of existing infrastructure to incorporate safety improvements and to include separated cycling facilities on the major collector and arterial roads. And so, and to do that, you have to have the space to do it. So you might actually be taking away a travel lane, travel space for vehicles to provide it for cycling facilities. So there would be an aggressive program of strategic intersection improvements to address capacity deficiencies. And the prioritization would be on safety and transit times, to enhance the transit times so they can meet their timetables and also to make it more competitive with auto travel. And then embracing the new technology regarding like just the way the signals are run, the traffic signals are run, and using any of that new technology regarding connected and autonomous vehicles to reduce delays and emissions. Those are 5 big ideas with different elements in each. And this 5th one has like the most aggressive. And so I just wanted to let you know some of the next steps. And then I'm going to stop the presentation. We'll be at our conclusion, and then we'll have the rest of our time for discussion. So for those next steps, we want to review comments from yourselves and others. And to finalize the hybrid strategy, we're going to need to determine an order of magnitude cost and benefits for each strategy. Obviously, if we're increasing transit a bunch, if we're adding new roads, if we're adding new cycling, it's going to cost some money to do those types of things. We're going to be assessing and evaluating these strategies against the performance criteria and those 4 council priorities so that we can develop a recommended strategy to guide the next steps of the TMP. And once we have that strategy in place, then we can look into the specific capital projects, policies, investments, and priorities for implementation. You're at the first of 2 virtual public information centers that we're having today. At 7 o'clock this evening, Ju Young and I and the city team will be back online. We'll be going through the exact same slides. Ju Young and I will be speaking to them. You're welcome to come back if you'd like. There'll be different people, but we will be recording that session as well. So you could wait and then fast forward and listen to the question and answer time. Online on the Connect PTBO website for the Transportation Master Plan, we have an online survey where we're looking specifically at those 5 strategies, and we're really looking at some of the trade-offs to understand how people feel about the different trade-offs, because we hear like a wide variety of opinions, and we're trying to figure out like where do we land in all of those in terms of how do people feel about different trade-offs. So I really would encourage you, if you haven't already, to take a look at that survey. It shouldn't take you too long, and we would love that kind of feedback because that'll help us in this whole process. We will be coming back to you and not too long in the fall to talk about what our draft recommended strategy is, because then we will be looking to present that to your council in November. Thank you for your attention to this presentation. And we still have some time left in our time here today. And like we have already done already, you can put items in the chat. If you're comfortable, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask your question. Vinod is on the line here from the city, and I am Brett. And if you send emails through the Connect PTBO website, they come to both of us. And so we'll receive your comments, and that depending on what your comments are, we can also follow up with you. Thank you very, very much for your time. And I'd like to go into the questions and answers. And I look to you, Ju Young, if there's one you want to read out or to get us started.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to just reiterate the online survey. There was a question whether if there's a poll or how people can weigh in on the scenarios that they prefer. So I've also put the link for the Connect Our Project website so that people can click on it right away and take a look at that. The survey link is also right on the main page there. So I just want to catch the low-hanging fruit first. So that's that. And then there was 2 comments, one from Joelle and one from M. Maloney, that was a lot of people were really agreeing on and liking. So the first question from Joelle was in regards to the parking regulation. So I'll just read off our comment here. And the question was, would parking regulation also affect the big box store parking lots along Lansdowne and Chemung Road? Something to keep in mind was that the parking regulation in downtown would divert traffic to those big box store areas. And that wouldn't really encourage people to, change their travel behaviors. So Brett, if you want to.
Thank you for that comment. And that is a trade-off. And certainly our team has no intention of trying to have the downtown businesses lose business. And maybe the city will comment on this, but when we're talking about the paid parking, we're talking about public parking. And the challenge with those big box stores is that their parking is on their own private property. And so they choose to handle that private property the way they do. I'm not sure if the city could actually make them charge for parking. So that is a challenge in the parking. And that is where you might, instead of having a parking minimum, you might say, no, there's a parking maximum to not allow places to oversupply parking. So that is definitely a challenge, and that we have been considering. And there's only so much the city can do. We're talking about paid parking, it's public parking. The private parking is the discretion of the private landowner. And I don't know if anyone from the city needs to jump in on that if I'm speaking incorrectly, but I think I've covered it.
Yeah, I'll just supplement that, Brett. It's Kevin Jones here, the manager of transportation. So yeah, I think every municipality across Ontario has struggled with this concept of, okay, how do you deal with the unlimited free parking that big box malls provide, and how that competes with other areas where we have paid parking. No one's really figured that one out yet, but I think in those more aggressive scenarios, it would it would require us to start looking at different ways of accommodating that and trying to adjust the cost structure of how those businesses pay for their land and their land use decisions, and maybe try and get them to pass those costs along to customers that use those stores. We don't have all the answers yet, but if if that's something that works into meeting our strategies, we would certainly have to roll our sleeves up and start talking to other municipalities to see how they've tackle this problem, and see what kind of policies we might be able to put in within the rules of how we deal with land use, taxation, and things like that across the community.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so the other question we had was in regards to the cycling facility. So we were talking about different kilometers or different programs that we would have for the cycling infrastructure. The question was in particular to what types of cycling facilities there are, because currently what you see is probably off-road trails, and what's on road are just paint roads, so it's bike lanes. So I believe that we are following the CMP's recommendations for that. And so they have, somebody also mentioned that we already know that they're going with a little bit of hybrid of the Spark scenario that was presented as part of the CMP. And what I believe is that they are planning on having different types of cycling facility for the protection and the safety of the cyclists as well. And as part of the Spark scenario, they are definitely looking to expand the off-road trails as well. As Brett mentioned, that it would be awesome to have those connecting trails and on-road cycling, or even in boulevard cycling facilities to connect to get to your destinations. So if you're interested in more details on that, we are really working with the CMP group to be able to combine some of our master plans together. But the details on this cycling facilities are coming from the CMP team. Anything else you'd like to add on that? Either Brett or Kevin or anyone from the city?
Thanks, Ju Young, for that response.
Yeah, I would only add that the specific infrastructure recommendations will come out of the cycling master plan. So they're in that stage of work right now, looking at different corridors and what type of facilities might fit, targeting that sort of hybrid accelerate Spark scenario, where we would sort of have a hybrid scenario or a accelerate scenario developed that the city would sort of commit to as a funding program. But we'd also be looking at additional cycling infrastructure that would align with the Spark scenario, that we could reach out to take advantage of federal infrastructure funding programs when they come through. So that's kind of this framework, and they will be looking at individual projects and the types of facilities that might best be suited in certain areas, and then those will be incorporated into the TMP.
Awesome, thank you. So I also had a question from James talking about different cost benefits. So obviously we're talking about cost of actually building and implementing of the infrastructure and the programs. But James's question was in regards to, are there any consideration for the environmental damages or environmental improvements? And so I'll flag that for Brett, but we just want to say that at the end of our at the last stage of our project, we do have different evaluation, and environmental cost is definitely one of the items that we do take a look at.
Yeah, thanks for starting that answer, Ju Young, because I agree 100% that we have multiple tools, and some of them are easy to quantify, some of them are not as easy to quantify. But like, just in terms of environmental impacts, if we were going to build a new road and it was going to go through an environmentally sensitive area, then we can flag that as, well, this would have a greater environmental impact than not building it. And then even the alignment, you could have something that bisects something, or you could have something skirt the side. So both of them would impact it, but the one that's skirting the side might impact it less, right? So we have that as one of our performance criteria in terms of environmental when we are looking at specific projects or corridors, so that we can identify that this would have a greater environmental impact. I had mentioned on the transit in terms of transit being free, or at least a reduced fare for someone who's walking onto the bus. So there is a financial cost to that. if the person walking on the bus doesn't pay, then maybe the taxpayers or someone else is paying for it. But there also is some benefit to that in terms of equity, in terms of enabling people to access places. So that has to be included as part of the equation. So we're trying to take a holistic approach and use a multiple account evaluation to consider a lot of different factors. And that's why we have all these 34 performance criteria, to make sure that we're not just focusing on one type of evaluation to consider these different strategies.
If I just may quickly ask and jump in. So when you're looking, say, for example, with the free bus fares, there are also like environmental economic benefits in terms of greater economic participation. People no longer spending their money directly on the bus every time they go. We might be spending that money downtown. So you might say the benefits are not necessarily to the council, but there would be definitely benefits to the local economy, particularly downtown. You could also say there's health benefits in terms of decreased health costs, because people are not having to deal with such high levels of air pollution. So are you capturing those sort of economic impacts and outcomes as well? And that's kind of what I was getting at. It's like, it's very hard because these are intangible, they're not necessarily directly linked, but the multiple impacts of all of these things which are interconnected could be that there would be a significant improvement economically, which you're not capturing, which doesn't show the true impact and true costs and benefits of going for the most, as you might call it, extreme, but I would say the most sensible option, anticipating that if you don't do something now, then your costs are going to be higher later on. And those costs are going to be higher in areas such as the environmental degradation, the healthcare costs, the cost in my home for air conditioning from a hotter planet and a hotter city. These sort of costs need to be captured as well.
Yeah, so, and I see, it looks like Ju Young is taking some of those notes, and we have this recorded so that we have those comments. We are considering a lot of things, but I'll be honest, I don't think we are considering everything that you just said. So that's why we're taking notes on that, and to try to factor that into the overall evaluation. I have been saying that we're trying to take a holistic view. We're not just considering one aspect, but you've brought up some very good points, and I'm glad that we have this recorded so we can note those and figure out ways to bring that in. And if we can't quantify it even, at least we can note it as like a qualitative impact, to think like these are other things you need to consider to the decision makers in terms of that, some of these benefits that aren't maybe as easy to quantify, but still could be realized in the future.
Okay.
What do we have next, Ju Young?
So Greg had mentioned on the 15-minute community. So this is talking about being able to reach all your destinations within the 15 minutes. I know internally we've talked about that quite a bit. So the question was, please comment on how we can drive a more complete community and how the policy will be included into that. He was mentioning that Peterborough seems to be missing this key element in regards to the new developments as well.
I think that that goes along with the land use. So that fourth column, on the column on the furthest right, where we talk about land use approach, so that people can do those things. And this is like where we get into some of those trade-offs, I guess, because where I live in Markham, I can walk to a Shoppers Drug Mart, and typically do walk to the Shoppers Drug Mart, and I can get like most of your day-to-day things right there, preventing me from having to drive somewhere else. The way we set up our cities and the land use, do we enable that to happen? Or the corner store seems to maybe have gone by the wayside in many communities. And if there were a corner store, would people go to it if the prices were higher than a big box store? And so the answer might be yes for one person, but is it yes for enough people that corner store can stay in business? So certainly, in principle, we support the 15-minute community concept. I live that myself and I find it a great benefit. I'm fortunate in that regards. And that's part of the land use and transportation integration that is very challenging to achieve, but is certainly on our mind. And there's multiple aspects that go into that to try to make that happen. I don't know if anyone from the city wants to add in on that.
I'd just like to supplement that, Brett. Again, it's Kevin here from the city. So at the initial stages, we are taking our guidance from the ongoing official plan with regard to land use and the sort of the land use approach and how land use is being allocated around the city. But you did notice in a couple of the strategies that Brett presented, we've suggested, if we want to get more aggressive in some of these strategies, we may need to make some changes to those land use. So I guess at the first stage, we are taking the official plan as our guide, but there may be some things we can do if we decide that we want to take a more aggressive strategy, that we could relook at some of the policies in the official plan. And that would be an outcome of the TMP process if we select those more aggressive strategic options.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so we have another comment here from Jackie, and a lot of people had agreed on it and had liked the comments that she's provided. And it's in regards to the education or educating the decision makers and municipality staff on some of the issues, because the Jackie's experience is that indicating that not all that there's the in-depth and the seriousness of the issues in terms of, for climate change and changing modes of transportation may not all necessarily be it might not be seen as serious. So Jackie's comment also was that, the timeline for the TMP is about 30 years, but yes, we're expecting to have that 30 years to change, but maybe that's a little bit too long for us to implement some of the sustainable change options. So the question was, are there mechanisms to build into the TMP for the decision makers and these municipal staff?
So our transportation master plan report will include an implementation chapter where it would be a phased implementation. So we would be showing not everything being done or constructed in the first year, but we would be trying to show that, like, what would generally be accomplished in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, and then beyond, like to the year 2051. That would be our recommendation. The council will then need to put the dollars behind, the funding behind anything that would cost money. And so, like, sometimes the priorities will change. But so we're trying to set the city up for success by not putting so many things in to like 5 years that it'd be impossible to achieve, but to be strategic and to figure out like what makes the most sense to meet that vision, what would give like the biggest benefit in the short term. So it will be phased in. It is a 30-year vision, and it would be phased in, and the document is a living document. We're spending a lot of time to prepare this, but it likely would not be in place for 30 years. Typically, cities will revisit a document like a transportation master plan every 5 to 10 years. I think the city, I'm sorry, I should know this off the top of my head, the date of the last city's transportation master plan, but there has been one before. And so we are building upon that and engaging with people today. And this document is designed to serve that vision, but some priorities change, things happen, there will be different forecasts for the future. And so the city is very likely to be updating this. And it'll really be also in a way to monitor how are we progressing? Are we achieving these goals that we have set? And if not, then maybe more measures need to be taken. So there will be a phased implementation plan.
And for anybody that I am reading some of the questions off of, if I am maybe not 100% understanding your questions right, then feel free to unmute yourself and correct me or add in any additional questions as you wish. And so for the next question that I have is from Rob. And it's talking about in the initial stages for our goals and vision. The council wanted to cut down on the overhead and the asset maintenance cost. But in the current phase right now, there are a lot of the weight has been put on the public transportation, additional routes and doubling options, and free for public transportation. So his question is that it seems to be contradicting and make each other impossible.
And that's why we're here today, is to hear the different comments, and because we have been hearing comments from a lot of different perspectives, and that's like the benefit of just interacting with people. And so if you look at our survey, some of the questions are pretty direct in terms of these types of trade-offs. So if we put more into transit, that might be to encourage people to not use another mode. Now the transit's running on the same streets as the car, so there might need to be some investment in the street network as well. We do recognize that these are some extreme measures in terms of if you're making transit free, it's free to get on, but it's not necessarily free to the city. Someone is paying somewhere. But in our consultation to this point, we have heard a lot of people who would like to see a greater modal shift to transit. So we're trying to be responsive to those comments, but that's why we have 5 different strategies to that not all of them have the same measures, and not all of them are going to the same level. Like for transit, we went from a 14% increase in the service hours to 120%. So there will be a big difference in the cost for those two that will have to be considered.
Thank you for that, Brett. I see
Yeah, Brett,
there's-
I would just actually add to that, you know, we've got a number of different criteria that we're assessing these strategies against. And I mean, it's a good point. Some things that may achieve one criteria or one objective may not achieve all the objectives. For example, you know, expanding transit, there may be a cost implication, there may be an operating cost implication, but it may do really great on some of the climate change objectives or in terms of reducing the need for road widening. So that's why there's this holistic approach. We have a number of different criteria that we're assessing all the different strategies. And really what we're trying to find is which strategic direction is going to do the best job of achieving all of those objectives so that we can design a transportation system around that strategic objective.
Thank you for that, Kevin. So we have been having a really good dialogue in the chat right now in terms of cycling and, you know, feasibility of cycling in Peterborough as well. So we have about 4 minutes left of this meeting. And so I just want to open up the floor for anyone for any additional comments or questions that you want to be answered by the project team. So we are taking all of the comments in the chat function as well. So definitely we'll take notes of all of the comments here. Obviously, it's hard to read through very thoroughly of every single comment at this moment, but thank you all for all your comments so far and the questions. And so I really, really encourage, if you haven't done so already, to definitely go over to our project website to be able to, you know, give your input in that and in the survey as well. We do have some different questions, particular questions for the strategies that we've developed. So that would be an option for where you can give us all your information, your thoughts, and also there is a last 2 questions where you can give us any additional thoughts like what you've given today to be able to provide in the survey.
Anyone that want to ask a last question then, before we bid everyone a good afternoon? This presentation, we have a voiceover. You'll hear my voice again. If you wanted to go over it again, we will eventually be uploading this very presentation, this recording, to the website. And like I said, we're online again tonight at 7. You can look at that later if you'd like to hear the question and answer that come out of that dialogue as well. It's exciting for us to work in a city where people are very passionate about their future. So we really appreciate that everyone taking their time today to provide us these comments. We look for your ongoing participation in the project.
I'm sorry, would there still be time for a question?
I'm still here.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I just put in a question here with regards to the waterways around Peterborough and the significance of waterways to transportation for the Mississauga and Anishinaabe, who are the first peoples of this land, and how that could inform thinking about alternatives to car and thinking about, sustainable ways of getting around Peterborough. So yeah, I've just been, because it seems, like Peterborough, with the city being right next to the water, and the water dividing sort of, or connecting, depending on how we see it, the East City and West City. Yeah, I've just been wondering, it seems like a particularly significant opportunities, I guess, to think about how water could, sort of lead us to think of alternative modes of transportation and shifting modes of transportation, and something that isn't really seen in other cities and regional municipalities in Canada. So yeah, I was just wondering if you have been thinking about waterways and using those, or as alternative modes of transportation, and sort of making use of the particularity here that we have a river and a canal, also the Trans-Severn Waterway, that has been facilitating transportation for millennia, basically.
Yeah, and thank you for that. To date, we have not been considering the waterways as a way to impact the way people travel in those peak hours. But to your point, Peterborough started because of the waterway, right? And people before, people have been using that waterway for a long, long time. I've seen people take tourist boat on it. I've seen people canoeing for recreation. I haven't seen someone try to get somewhere for like a utilitarian purpose. We can take that comment back. We're primarily looking at, okay, during those peak hours, how can we shift travel either to a more sustainable mode, which on the waterway could be, or to a different travel hour. We also want to see like ones that will make enough of a difference. So can we get enough people to want to use the waterway to make a difference so that you could see that there'd be capacity somewhere else, right? That would free up capacity somewhere else. So that's the challenge, I think, but we can take that comment on board and consider it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just a quick note, there will be the Canadian Canoe Museum is going to be built just on East City very soon. So it just seems like with that sort of development coming over, it's going to be more grander, I guess, than the one that's currently along Monaghan. Anyways, so it just seems like there could be a link there, and also a way to really acknowledge in the plan the first peoples of this land, and their wisdoms and their cultures as well, and sort of so as to bring forward through another avenue sort of the city's commitments to work in partnership with the Indigenous communities of the area. Maybe this could be a way for the city to work together, I guess, to bring back some of those sustainable ways of traveling and through the water, and honor the waterways of the area as well. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. Anyone else like to unmute? We have gone over our time, so we appreciate people staying, but we do want to be respectful of people's time. But our team is still here if someone would like to unmute and ask a question. Oh, Ju Young, I think we can bid everyone to have a good afternoon. Please tell your friends or colleagues about the 7 o'clock presentation. It's the same slides, but likely some different questions. And please continue to monitor that Connect PTBO website. If you submit an email, it does come to Vinod and myself, and so we will get it. And of course, that online survey, we really appreciate people completing, and tell others about that. The more data points we can get, the more input we can get. We want to see the different spectrum of people's opinion, and to try to develop like some themes that come out of that. So we greatly appreciate your feedback on that. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for your participation. Goodbye.
Thank you.